Yeah, so hi again. Welcome to this Jekyll and Hyde masterclass. We were just having a little bit of technical issues with the first one. So I'm just going to wait for people to rejoin this one in case people want to join again. And in the meantime, I'm just going to run some tests. So the problem last time was whenever I was sharing my screen, you couldn't hear me. So I think you can hear me now. Yeah, you guys can hear me now. So let me just try sharing a screen. If I share this screen here and keep talking, hopefully you can hear me. We'll see. Yeah, so does that work? Can you still hear me? Or can you not? I can see it's sharing, so that's good. Oh, good. Yeah, we can hear. Okay, so yeah, I'll just wait a couple more minutes, see if everyone can rejoin this one. So sorry for the confusion today. That's never happened before. I don't know what the problem was. Usually, when YouTube lives, there's some kind of technical error somewhere. So, today's technical error apparently. So yeah, hopefully, hopefully we're all good now. So yeah, I'll just wait for a couple of people to rejoin. I'm just going to retype what was in the chat box before. So yeah, hi and welcome to this masterclass. If you have any questions about Jekyll and Hyde that you want me to discuss or answer in the class, feel free to just pop them in the chat box. And we can do a bit of a free discussion as well. So the idea behind this is just to give you a little bit of an introduction into the story and kind of understanding the details of the text. That's kind of the first half of the session. The second half of the session will be looking at how do you put that into an exam or essay format. So we'll have a look at some example answers. We'll maybe try an example question if we have time. We'll see. Yes, I'm just waiting for a couple more people to rejoin. There's quite a few people on the other live that don't seem to have joined this one yet, so hopefully they'll find it in a minute or two. We'll see. In the meantime, I'll just start going through, some of the basics of the start out with. So, whenever you're learning a piece of literature, you want to start with the plot summary. So you want to start with a summary of the main events of the story. Just kind of relays it here for you. So I always organize my notes, which you'll find on the Scrbbly platform, in this way, which basically is chapter by chapter, action by action. If you're doing revision, it's good to actually make revision notes this way too, but you might just do one sentence per bullet point or something as a revision. You basically want to get the story really straight in your head and not just what happens, but what order does it happen in. So we meet Utterson and Enfield. They're on a walk, and we don't really know much about them, but we know that Utterson is a lawyer. He's lean, long, dusty, dreary, yet somehow lovable. Enfield is his friend, and they quite regularly take a walk. We also have this story. It starts including the name Jekyll. So we know that the story is called The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, but we only just start to hear about Jekyll. We also hear about a kind of mysterious but quite villainous man who tramples over a young girl, story that Enfield tells about the door that is the back of Jekyll's house. Later on, we learn that this is Hyde. So this is quite a classic technique that people use, writers use to kind of drum up mystery and suspense. We don't meet the characters that are in the title, the titular characters, until later on. We hear about them first, and then we meet them later on. So the first chapter, we don't meet the main characters. We just meet the protagonist, Utterson, who is the kind of character that we follow through the story. We had quite a lot of fun making these resources with adding pictures in from old stories, old performances of Jekyll and Hyde. So I think these are actually from theatre performances, if you see any of these pictures in our resources. It's a novella, so it only has 10 chapters anyway, and all the chapters are quite short. So if you are studying Jekyll and Hyde, it's a good thing that you yeah, that you you don't have to read too much of it. Yeah, so chapter 2 then. Yeah, so we've got this kind of constant concern from Utterson's part, and he's worried about his friend Lanyon as well as his friend Jekyll. He realizes that actually there's some kind of problem between Lanyon and Jekyll. They've fallen out, they're not friends anymore. And he also meets Hyde in this chapter. So Hyde gives him an impression of deformity. It's really good with the quotes for Jekyll and Hyde to just get the little, like short quotes like impression of deformity or something troglodytic or without any nameable malformation. Those kinds of quotes, Satan's signature, if you get them kind of stuck in your head, you can write them quickly in essays, you can use them embedded in your paragraphs, and it really helps. So in my head, when I'm doing Jekyll and Hyde or Shakespeare or something like that, I'll just have those like really short, 2 to 4 word quotes in my head that I'll just sort of run through like this. So he meets Hyde. Hyde is deformed. He's pale and dwarfish. He has Satan's signature upon his face. He looks strange and unusual. He doesn't look like a typical Victorian. And he seems kind of panicked, and he tries to leave and not speak to Utterson when he encounters him. So this just, escalates mystery and tension further. We get more invested in what is this story, what's going on, why are Jekyll and Lanyon not talking? What is Hyde got to do with this? So most of this novella is about tension and mystery. So in your analysis of it, when you start, going through the reader effect or the effect on the audience, you want to think about the mystery, the tension, the fear, the uncertainty. I also have a really bad cough today. My voice keeps going. I think it's just like, sometimes you do things and everything just decides it's not going to work. It's one of those days. So bear with me. We'll get through all of that. And yeah, you'll learn a lot from the masterclass by the end. Everything seems to be working now. So I'm glad, which is nice. So yeah, basically what we do now is we go a little bit more into what's called the rising action of the story. The rising action is where the story is kind of progressing, but it's increasing tension leading up to a climactic moment. So as the story progresses, it doesn't actually answer questions, it opens more questions up. So chapters, 3 through to about kind of 6, 7, they're what we call the rising action of the story. So yeah, we've got this, dinner party that Jekyll hosts, and then they start discussing something to do with a will. Utterson's a lawyer, so this is kind of a normal thing to discuss with a lawyer, your will and testament. But it's strange because Jekyll asks Utterson to change the will so that it basically all goes to Hyde if Jekyll suddenly disappears or he dies or that kind of thing. It's quite strange. Yeah, so Jekyll says there's nothing wrong with that. The moment I choose, I can be rid of Mr. Hyde, which is such a strange thing to say about a friend or an acquaintance or someone who you know so well that when you die, you would pass everything that you own onto them. So again, increasing mystery, increasing tension. Utterson is concerned, but he's also professional in this capacity because he's a lawyer. So he has a mixture of personally being very worried, but professionally having to do what his client Jekyll says to do, which is change the will to include Jekyll. Oh, sorry, Hyde. Easy to confuse. So yeah, it's important actually technique-wise at this moment. I'm just going to kind of highlight this one here. It's using third-person limited perspective. So we follow Utterson through the story. So it's written in third person, he and she, but we follow one character through the story. So our knowledge of what's going on is limited to the protagonist, to the character of Utterson. It's really important to mention that in an essay somewhere, the narrative perspective, the narrative voice, because you'll get a lot of marks for that in an essay. Because instead of just talking about the characters like they're real, you show awareness that they're actually created by an author. And the author creates all of these characters, but chooses to follow just one of them through the story, which gives us limited insight into what's happening, which also increases this tension, this mystery, this confused atmosphere. Yeah, so I see a few more of you guys have joined us now. Thank you for joining, and so much. So sorry for the confusion with the first masterclass. This one seems to be working fine. Carew is kind of like a side note. So chapter 4, it's a little bit of a weird one. I'll just let you read through Carew for a second, what happens with him. It's important that he's a Sir Danvers Carew, because it shows his kind of elevated position in society. He's an aristocrat, he's the upper classes. So if you're analysing Carew, it's really important to talk about his class. So yeah, we have this idea of Carew being murdered is so shocking to the Victorian audience. Another thing you want to do when you're exploring analysis of characters is think about how would the original audience respond. So we do have how we respond now to the story, but we're not the intended readers. The intended readers are Victorian. So you kind of want to get into the mind of a Victorian person. Think about, how do they feel? What do they think? What are their beliefs? How do their beliefs affect their interpretation of the story? So looking at Carew and his murder is one example of that. So he basically is an aristocrat. He's upper class. Most Victorians would seriously respect him. So it's kind of crazy that Hyde just doesn't care. He doesn't care that this is an aristocrat. He doesn't care that this is a respected member of parliament. It's an extreme thing to do. It's not just trampling over a girl now. He's murdering a very high up member of society. So for a Victorian audience, that's absolutely terrifying. That even the most well-respected, refined gentlemen are not safe from Hyde's kind of murderous behavior. So yeah, we've got chapter 5. There's a feeling of, you know, Utterson's getting closer to the truth as well. So these kinds of mysterious novels, you can call it as well proto-detective fiction. I'm just going to type that in the chat box. So it's not actually detective fiction properly, because detective fiction was not an established genre at this point, but it is something that helped to create that genre. So we call it proto-detective fiction. You can research more into the genre of proto-detective fiction, and on the Scrbbly courses we have a lot of stuff to do with that as well. But for now, I'll just say that proto-detective fiction is focused around constantly creating suspense and tension, constantly creating mysteries that the reader needs to find out. So we're really kind of obsessed and compelled to figure out the story, to find out what's happening. So yeah, it's quite important that, Jekyll is changing his opinion of Hyde, Utterson is changing his opinion of Jekyll. There's something growing, changing, escalating at this point. Gives a feeling of unease and uncertainty. I like this picture in particular. So yeah, chapter 6, we have this feeling that Hyde suddenly relieves pressure off Jekyll. There's not the close connection that they once had. And Jekyll seems for a moment to be a little bit more like his old self. And Lanyon and Utterson also meet for dinner together, just like old times. So there's a little bit of what we call relief here of tension. Chapter 6. It's relieving pressure for a minute, but unfortunately, it doesn't last. It's a very temporary thing because suddenly Jekyll is acting even weirder than he was before. He's not really himself anymore. He just locks himself in the room, and his servant, um, won't let Utterson visit. And Lanyon, even though he invites Utterson to dinner, when Utterson actually goes to see Lanyon is so sick he's not going to recover. So we've got another really good little quote here: deep-seated terror within his mind. He's so racked by something, mentally and emotionally, that he becomes physically sick and he cannot recover from that physical sickness. And that's all to do with Jekyll. So again, we don't know exactly what. Lanyon talks about Jekyll's experiments as unscientific balderdash, which is a really, really good little short quote to use. Which means Lanyon is sort of a true scientist. So we try and analyze Lanyon as what we call a foil to Jekyll. He's a foil character because he's like Jekyll. They're both doctors, they're both scientists, but Jekyll is immoral. He doesn't care about good and evil. He just cares about what is he capable of doing. Lanyon, on the other hand, is moral. He has a sense of morality. So when him and Jekyll start experimenting in this way, he gets physically sick from the immoral actions of what Jekyll's doing. The idea that Jekyll is basically going against God, he's going against, nature. He's basically gone mad with power because he is a bit of a genius, Jekyll, and he is really capable as a scientist, but his lack of morals leads him down a very dark path. That's usually how a Victorian would analyze his character. So yeah, Lanyon, warns Utterson and then dies mysteriously, which is very tragic. They go back to the back door and they look into the windows and they find Jekyll up in the window. I quite like this scene where he's just kind of mysteriously there and he just looks very depressed, very ill, very weak. And he suddenly feels panicked and shocked and then runs back inside and they just don't hear from him. So, we kind of have in chapter 7 what we call a cyclical structure. So a repeat of the cyclical structure means it's kind of going in a cycle. So it's a repeat of chapter 1, but the stories progress. So this time we see Jekyll, but we see Jekyll in this very compromised, strange sort of state of being. So it's, chapter 7 of 10. The mystery is still not revealed at this point. There's so much tension, so much suspense built up over these short chapters. But we start to think it's actually spiritual rather than physical at this point. We don't think he's physically ill. We think there's something wrong with his soul, something wrong with his mind. Spiritual and mental in the Victorian times is the same sort of thing. So we, nowadays wouldn't necessarily say something spiritual is also mental, but the Victorians would say that. Yeah, so getting towards the end now of the structure. This one's a very dramatic chapter 8. So we've got this sense of, Utterson is Poole, the servant, is so concerned for Jekyll that he actually goes and asks Utterson to help him, see what's up or help him with him. So Utterson goes to the house and Jekyll's locked himself away and this strange voice is coming out from, behind the door, which is just really weird. It's not Jekyll's voice. But no one else has gone in there because Poole is the servant who's running the house. So, yeah, we've got this weird kind of situation where Jekyll is um, locked away, and suddenly Jekyll doesn't sound like Jekyll anymore. He sounds unusual and strange, and so Paul is so frightened and confused by this that he just goes to get Utterson to try and help. They break down the door eventually, so they start kind of, arguing with the thing behind the door. It's throwing out orders for drugs, medicines, prescriptions, bits of paper. So he's just kind of throwing things onto the landing and making Paul go and get those things. Paul said that he saw this thing emerge and it looked like a dwarf or a rat. So it's, really dark and sort of twisted at this point, like there's maybe something in the room with Jekyll, is what we think. And then they hear Hyde's voice say, "For God's sake, have mercy." They break the door down and actually, Hyde's poisoned body is dead on the floor. He's wearing really large clothes. He's wearing Jekyll's clothes and he's holding a broken vial. This is what we call the climactic moment of the story. So I would suggest, making sure that you read this part of the chapter in detail, maybe even annotate it to get used to it. So there's a confession and an envelope left as well. And Utterson says they'll call the police and try and figure out what's happened. So at this point, Jekyll's dead, Lanyon's dead, Carew's dead, the girl is trampled. We've got a lot of, chaos happening. Utterson mysteriously disappears from the story at this point. So structurally, one thing that's very interesting to analyze is the fact that the entire story in real time takes place up until chapter 8. Chapters 9 and 10 are like extra layers going into the story that change our perspective of what we've just seen. So there's no more story after this point. We never see Utterson again. Very unusual to have a protagonist that you then never see again after, 2/3 of the book is over. That's really weird. It's a very unusual structure, but it's very effective. It's what we call epistolary. You can use this word when you're analyzing it. You can kind of look this up. Epistolary means it happens in episodes. So sometimes we're reading the story, but sometimes we're also reading letters. Sometimes we're reading diary entries, that kind of thing. So chapter 9 is Dr. Lanyon's letter, which reveals more insight into what's gone on. He just gives more details on, how Jekyll transformed into Hyde, what the relationship was between them. So this is where we finally get the revelation that we've been wanting about what is the relationship between Jekyll and Hyde, because we don't know until this point. So the revelation is that Hyde is Jekyll. They're the same person, and we just didn't know that before now. So the potion is the thing that causes Jekyll to turn into Hyde. The problem is not necessarily that Jekyll turns into another person. The problem is that Hyde is not exactly another person. He's a representation of Jekyll's repressed desires. So everything that Jekyll wanted to do in his life that he couldn't do, all his urges, to go out and gamble and probably drink and just go crazy, act out his violent urges, his anger, all of that stuff that normally, as humans, we keep a check on that. We don't just indulge all of that all the time. Being Hyde allows Jekyll to indulge all of the bad aspects of himself. And the more he indulges them, the more addictive those bad aspects become, to a point where he is, he needs Hyde. He can't not be him. He can't not exercise those urges through the form of being Hyde. The morality of that, the fact that it's so immoral that Jekyll just turns into Hyde and Hyde could go around doing what he wants without any recourse on Jekyll, anyone realizing that it's actually Jekyll doing those things, that makes Lanyon so sick to his stomach. The idea of that, the fact that not just Jekyll doing this, but everyone could start doing that and the whole world would sort of turn to crime and debauchery, that is what makes him sick and ill. The fact that the potential of danger in this thing that Jekyll has created is so bad that Lanyon doesn't recover from the shock of it. It's really fascinating that it's a bit like modern day AI or something, how bad AI could go and how it could take over, being so shocked and horrified by the the terrible potential of that. We might not die from it, but we can empathize with that type of feeling that someone creates something that revolutionizes humanity to a point where it's actually really bad for us and it destroys our society. It's a very interesting idea. It's quite a common idea in the sci-fi genre as well. So finally, and I think this is the most interesting chapter, is chapter 10. So I really recommend that you read chapter 10 in detail. Chapter 10 is the full statement of the case. So it's kind of like the psychology behind what was going on. It's Jekyll's own thoughts, feelings, experiences, and that kind of thing. So he explains this thing called the duality of man, which is probably the most important thing to take from this chapter. The idea that man is not truly one, but truly two. We have a good and evil in all of us, and Jekyll was able to split this good and this evil off and just let his evil run wild. Quite a terrifying idea, even in the modern world, but especially terrifying to the Victorians because they're so repressive. They hate the idea of being uncivilized, wild, savage, and so on. So yeah, that's a summary of what happened so far. We're just going to take a quick look at a different document if my thing works. Hopefully this still works. So yeah, we'll just have a really quick look to end the masterclass with an example essay. If I can find it on my computer. Where did it go? So this is just another of the Scrbbly documents. You're welcome to download all of these from the Scrbbly page. I think in the comments below there's a discount code if you're watching this video. So you're welcome to use that as well if you ended up watching the masterclass and you find the documents useful. Yeah, so this one is basically compare a bit of how would you write really well in an essay. There's a level 9 versus a level 7 grade. So I think maybe we'll go to, yeah, we'll have a look at the level 7 first. I'm just going to give you maybe the intro. See if I can get the intro and a paragraph on here if I sort of zoom out a little bit. So the question is, how far is Hyde presented as a frightening outsider? And this is an example of A grade writing. So yeah, I'll just let you guys read this for a second and pause myself. I'll give you maybe like 2-3 minutes to read, and then we'll have a look at the A star sort of full mark answer example as a comparison. So yeah, I'll let you read for a second. Yeah, so hopefully you've had a chance to have a quick look through these paragraphs. Again, all of these things are available on Scrbbly um, if you find the lessons useful, and you can look at the whole essay and so on as well. So yeah, so a couple of things. So the question is frightening outsider. To get a good grade, you need to just focus on that question alone. So don't tell the story, don't give loads of details. Um, just make sure that you think about the idea of the question, and everything you write is focused on the question. So one thing that this answer does really well is it doesn't deviate from the question. It's very focused on the idea of him being a frightening outsider. Uses those words quite a lot throughout, frightening and outsider in different ways. It has some really good ideas in terms of the terminology it's using: discourteous behavior, xenophobia, repressed. If you can start using advanced words, that really makes a huge difference to your grade, especially if you're aiming for those top levels. 100% just learn actual kind of concepts like what is repression, what is repulsion, that kind of thing. The best way to do that is read loads of example essays, read a lot about Jekyll and Hyde, and start writing down the type of vocabulary that people use to actually talk about the story, and then incorporate that into your essays. Usually, when I have students who are kind of a mid level grade, if I'm trying to push them to get a high level grade, that's one of the main things I'll do with them. It has some nice little structural things as well, like dramatic plot twist. It has a little bit of context, Freud's theory of the id and ego. If you use stuff like that, make sure you really understand it before you write about it, because it's not an easy thing to understand. You also want to be a little bit accurate. So here, actually, it says it supports Freud's theory of the id and ego, but Freud hadn't quite released his theory at the point that the novella was written. So it's kind of like exploring a similar idea to that, but it's not actually influenced by Freud. So you'd have to be careful if you use that as a context point. So being a little bit inaccurate will also drop your grade a bit. The topic sentence is really nice here, really clear. And we have some nice little quotes that are embedded. Trampled calmly over a young girl. Well, they're not nice, they're horrible. But the quotes are well structured for the essay. Left her screaming on the ground. There's a zoom in. So the use of the oxymoron as trampled and calmly. That's nice because we're zooming back into the quote. That shows deeper analysis. Always a really good thing to do in essays. Using a range of techniques, also really great. So auditory image. Adding a couple more quotes at the end, something troglodytic, just to sort of reinforce your original point. So yeah, this is really good writing, really, really solid. If we have a quick look at the mark scheme, you can see it gets, a really high level. And the only thing that the whole essay sort of gets picked up on is being a bit inaccurate with the context points, being really clear about that. So being clear and precise and accurate is really important for those high levels. This is an almost full mark answer, so it's almost perfect. There's only a few small things about it, but it's worth noting those things as well so that you can improve in your own writing. So this one is a little bit lower. It's a level 7 grade, so it's an A grade rather than an A star. It's still really good, but it's not quite the level of that first one. This is more like what kind of the average good student would write, is more like around this level. So if you're trying to go from that level 7 grade up to the level 9 grade, this is a really good document for you to use, because you can see the difference between what is a pretty solid grade and then what is like a super top level. So yeah, I'll let you just kind of read this for a second. So yeah, the reading on this one, as you can see, it's good. It's not bad at all. It's still using good terminology. It's still really solid with its quotes. It's still good with its techniques. It's not as confidently structured. It's not using super detailed vocabulary. It's a little bit more like point by point. So they're sort of writing something and then trying to write the next thing and trying to write the next thing. Whereas the first one I showed you, that's the nearly full mark answer, has something called coherence to it. Coherence is where everything kind of fits together in a full argument. So for that level 9 grade, or the really top grades, if you have a look at like this paragraph again here, this flows really well. Every sentence flows from the last and it builds on what the last one was saying, and there's a lot of confidence to the writing there. This one, the level 7 grade, still really good, but it feels not so confident. So this is one of the most important things to kind of take home from this masterclass, that you want to keep writing until your writing feels confident and until you can make it flow. The only way to go from this to that really top grade is practice. So you want to write a paragraph. You don't even have to write a whole essay. You can just do it, a few paragraphs at a time. Write a paragraph, look at how well you think you did, try and rewrite it a little bit better, flowing more, adding a little bit more depth, adding a little bit more terminology or high level vocab. Just keep doing that and you'll incrementally increase your level and your grade. And then once you can do it, just keep making sure you can consistently hit that top standard. Yeah, so this has been a slightly messy early start to the Jekyll and Hyde, but we've run very smoothly since then. So thank you so much for bearing with me. Does anyone have any questions as a final thing? Were you all kind of happy to leave it there? If you do have questions, you're always welcome to email us as well, admin@scrbbly.com. This is our email. So yeah, when you've got any follow-up questions, if you're watching this on a recording rather than live, feel free to. I've said a lot today for some reason. Nervous tick apparently. But yeah, send it through to admin@scrbbly.com if you have any questions, or you can just pop them in the chat box to me now. But hopefully you guys found that useful, and thank you so much for sticking with me. And yeah, I'm really rooting for you in your exams, and anything that we can do to help at Scrbbly, do get in touch. If you want the full Jekyll and Hyde course, in the comments below this video, there's links to that, and there's also a discount code there for you as well. So feel free to use our whole course if you feel like this is useful. So yeah, I'll sign off now. Thank you so much for watching, and hopefully see you guys soon in a future masterclass. Bye for now.